Hello and welcome to the Meet the Parents podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Meet the Parents podcast. We're here to bring you another 30 minutes of parenting chat from our team of blogging mums and dads. We've now reached episode 13 of the podcast, but it's far from unlucky for us, as this week Amie and I are joined for the first time by Hayley, who many of you will know as the driving force behind the blog Downside Up. So a warm welcome to Hayley and good evening, ladies.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me this evening.
Tonight we're going to start by giving Hayley a chance to introduce herself. Then we're also going to talk about reading and childhood literacy. And then we'll finish off by circling back to Hayley to talk about the role that she plays championing awareness and education of Down syndrome. It's possible you will already be familiar with Hayley from her multi-award winning blog Downside Up. But for those who aren't, Hayley, can you just give us the lowdown on you and your family?
Oh, goodness, Tim. We're just a very ordinary family. Bob and I have two girls, two gorgeous girls, Mia, who's 12, Natty, who's 9, and it's little Natty, who has that additional chromosome. So, yeah, Natty has Down syndrome, and we were sort of thrown onto a slightly different path 9 years ago, shall I say. It's something that we weren't expecting, and it was a very steep learning curve in the beginning, but yes, we decided to write Downside Up and sort of share our journey and our experiences and remove the fear from the condition, I guess, is the main thing.
Now, it's also possible that our listeners may just have heard you over the years in another form. So one of the other things that you've done is lend your voice to games. So
thank you, Tim.
Tell us a little bit more about that and how it came about.
One of my former hats, alongside some more serious stuff like being a language teacher, yes, I was the cheats mistress for PlayStation cheats. I'm a bit embarrassed, thank you very much. And I used to guide people through their PlayStation games and allow them to find shortcuts. But we'll gloss over that, I think.
Now, moving on to the more serious stuff, we'll talk about this in a bit more detail later, but just briefly explain for us why you started Downside Up and the purpose that it serves.
In all honesty, when Natty did arrive in our lives, in a planned home birth, her diagnosis did throw us off course, and we were more than a little shocked. And I think we sort of thought our lives were over as we knew it. And of course, we were so very wrong. It was our own sort of ignorance and fear at work there. And when Natty started school in reception, I decided not to go back to teaching, but instead to try to buy other new parents precious time with their newborns, to sort of remove that fear and to allow them to sort of bond more quickly. And it started off really as lots of practical tips. And then I think I wrote the first sort of quite emotive blog post about our experiences and our feelings in the early days. And that was the one that sort of went a little bit viral. And I soon realised people don't really want tips. They want shared experiences and to know that we're all the same, really. At the end of the day, aren't we all parents? We have the same fears and worries, and we have the same guilt trips. And, you both do, don't you? We all think we've done it wrong to start with. But I think that's how it began. And I often describe the blog as being quite organic. Really, it's just taken me where it needs to go. So as things come up in current affairs, or as new laws are passed, or as new tests come out, or as a particular parent writes with a certain question, I just follow it. There is no plan, really, Tim.
As a parent, some of the milestones in a child's early development that make us the most proud are often related to reading and literacy. Learning the alphabet, writing their name for the first time, or starting to read for themselves. Now, Amie is an ambassador for the children's book publisher Paragon, so who better to lead us in a discussion about the importance of reading and books? So over to you, Amie.
Thank you, Tim. I'm incredibly passionate about this. I mean, I was a literature student. I'm sure Hayley, being a language teacher, probably has a similar passion for young children reading and just enjoying, even if it's not Charlotte Bronte at the age of 12, just enjoying stories. And it's so important. I mean, there's just a wealth of research out there that just shows you all the different positives, from bonding with parents to language acquisition to understanding the world around you. So I've been an advocate of reading and encouraging an appreciation of literature and books in children pretty much from the off. It wasn't really something we thought about, it was just something we did, because my partner and I actually met doing an English literature, and I had a bit of American literature thrown in as well, degree at uni, and we both grew up with houses filled with books. So for us, it was one of those things that we did naturally, and we're really lucky that Little Miss seems to have developed a really natural and quite intense love of books as well. So that's kind of what spurred me on to be part with Paragon. But I do think, being parents, you're the role models, and even if you yourselves haven't got literature degrees, that doesn't mean that you can't enjoy books and reading and really start to love children's literature with your kids and stuff. I mean, do you guys read to your kids, and are books a large part of your lives?
Yeah, no, absolutely. As a small child, I was very much from the one more story, please brigade. And my mum worked nights, so she wasn't always around, but my dad was always happy to indulge my requests, and he would just keep on reading and reading until I finally nodded off. And after that, books were always a big part of my childhood. I remember before starting secondary school, we were given a reading list of, it must have been about 40 books to read over the summer. Now, while other kids read maybe 2 or 3, my parents either bought or borrowed the entire list, and I read every single one. Lord of the Rings, 3 days.
Wow.
Wow, that's impressive, Tim.
My wife's the same, so it's no surprise that all 3 of our kids are avid readers too. Although, I guess for me personally now, one of the downsides of being so involved in writing and reading blogs is that I've gone from reading what used to be 30 or 40 books a year to more like 3 or 4.
It's interesting, I have that problem as well, actually, and we're making a conscious effort to read physical books again, because that shows our daughter us reading books as opposed to using the iPad or whatever. Yes, but I do realise that I don't have many books to read, because most of what I read is blogs now.
Interesting, isn't it, how things are changing? But I agree, I love, there's something about a paper book, licking your finger to turn the pages, and the smell of them and the sound of that. I don't think you can get that on on a tablet for me. But
I completely agree.
I was going to say, like Tim and like you growing up, being read a story by a loved family member, it is one of the most poignant memories that I still have.
And I'm the same. Some of my happiest memories are of my parents reading me bedtime stories. They used to divide and conquer. So my mum, because we grew up in the States, my mum took it upon herself to introduce me to British kids' books. So I read Millie, Molly, Mandy, Worst Witch with her. And then my dad travelled a lot, so we worked our way through the Little House on the Prairie series. One by one, poor man suffered considerably for the art. But it's a lovely memory, and it's so clear, and I hope that my daughter has that with us as well. I read an article, this was about a few years ago now, when I was pregnant, I think, and it was talking about, our books dead, basically, and are people turning to ebooks and things, and it says, eventually, yes, but there are certain types of books that will probably remain as paper books for a lot longer, and some of them are coffee table books, photo albums, interestingly, which I thought was really interesting, because nobody seems to print photos anymore, and the other was children's books, because that important whole aspect of books and reading for children is also the tactile element. When they're really little, it's the flaps and the peekaboo and the move this and this moves. There's all that learning aspect, but then as well, as they're older, they trace the page with their finger to follow which word, which line they're on.
Interesting.
And I thought that was really interesting. Do you guys read with, it sounds as though you do read with your kids now, both as equally passionate by the sounds of it.
Reading to the kids it's just part of the evening routine for us, and even though ours are all different ages, the 3 of them still go to bed at the same time most evenings, which means we usually have a communal reading session. It's often the only quality time I get to spend with them on weekdays.
Now, our eldest, Mia, is now in year 7, she's 12, and of course she's an avid reader and she reads by herself a lot of the time. But I went to a very interesting parent session at her school in which they advised us all to carry on reading to our teens. So at bedtime, I will sit with her and read, half a chapter.
Yeah, and Natty loves reading as well, doesn't she?
Oh, Natty adores books, and both girls. We were reading like you, Amy. We were sort of showing them picture books from weeks old, and Natty is very much a visual learner. She loves books. She has her favourites, but she's also a really good reader, and that's one of her strengths. We follow the Down Syndrome Association advice and Down's education advice. So although she does learn using the read, write, ink method and the jolly phonics, she more so learns words as whole words. So she learns to look at the whole shape of a word. But she's doing really well. She's on level 6 and 7 with her Oxford Reading Tree, and she loves reading too. So a very precious time, and something that boosts her confidence, and she knows she's good at it.
I think that's important for any child, though, whether they have any form of disability or, whether they're dyslexic even. It's just about finding anything that kind of makes them feel good about themselves and makes them happy, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's not... I think what all three of us have identified is that reading is not just about attainment levels.
Not at all.
Exactly. It's about enjoyment and getting lost in a story or in a picture. And as you mentioned earlier, Amy, it's about learning about the world.
You mentioned that you were reading to your girls, Hayley, from weeks old. Tim, were you the same? Was it kind of always a part of the routine?
With all three kids, they were no more than... certainly a few weeks or a couple of months old when we started reading to them. And we used to have an old rocking chair, and that was the designated reading chair where we introduced them to, all the books that I think most parents will be familiar with, things like Dear Zoo, Where's Spot, Peepo, all the Julia Donaldson books and so on.
Fabulous.
It's interesting because a lot of people don't think to read to such young children, which is quite disappointing.
Yes.
That's a harsh word, sorry. It's disappointing from the perspective that these children, they do interact with books from even just weeks old, the crinkling of the pages, if there's a mirror on the page, you get those soft books rather than necessarily ones with stories, and you just talk through what's on the page with them. And it's about teaching them to focus that attention, focus their eyes, build those eyes muscles so they're looking where you tell them to look as well. I mean, it's a whole wealth of different skills.
And everything, even turning pages from right to left, all of that. And we had those, I think they were called Social Baby series for Natty. So they were black and white, and it was easier for her to focus on them. But yes, certainly from weeks old. But I have heard parents, family members saying, I haven't bought her a book yet because she can't read. So,
I mean, obviously there's a lot to be said for personal differences in this as well. I mean, do you think there is something hereditary? Obviously the three of us have all voiced a real love of books. Or do you think there is kind of the Matilda effect out there where even if a parent doesn't exhibit an interest in books, there is still the chance that the child might? But also just because a parent does, not every child will enjoy reading. And how do you think we can encourage people to help their kids with that?
I think perseverance is the key, because I think, as with a lot of things, sometimes kids don't take to things immediately. But if you keep working it into the routine and making it part of the normal way of doing things, then eventually a lot of them, I think, will pick it up.
It comes back to maybe children perceiving whether reading is natural and an enjoyable part of family life, or whether they're being pushed into it. And that can turn children off, I think.
I was dyslexic, and I didn't actually read a book on my own till I was 10. Which my parents were becoming increasingly concerned by. And they could tell that I enjoyed books. I loved theatre, so, I'd happily sit and watch a play. But I just wouldn't read a book on my own, and I would barely write half a page, and they just couldn't figure it out. And then it's something just clicked when I was 10. It was a Jacqueline Wilson book, and it was Tracy Beaker. I remember the storyline even so vividly. And from then, I've just flown. And I'm technically still dyslexic, but you learn how to cope with that. And also as you get into your teenage years, you kind of hopefully learn coping mechanisms. And again, because I discovered I actually enjoyed reading, you make the effort. What are your kids' favourite books?
Yeah, with us, obviously, there is a difference between Cara and between the boys. She's a real girly girl when it comes to books. So lots of Disney princess stuff, Angelina Ballerina.
I remember Angelina.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'd forgotten all about her.
Now, the boys, they're currently into things like Horrid Henry and Minecraft fiction, which I'm not against in and of itself, but they are quite possibly the worst written books I have ever seen. I have to read them through gritted teeth. I am desperate to move them on to better written stuff like, I don't know, the phone directory. I'm really hoping that we'll give Harry Potter a go soon.
I think I was in year 7 the year it was published, and I was kind of the same age as the first Harry Potter in the first Harry Potter book. So yeah, you're not far off.
Despite the fact our kids are really techie, as I've talked about on the podcast before, they're just not ebook readers. You know, video and YouTube, absolutely. But when it comes to books, they're surprisingly analog. I think reading off paper just allows them, it allows the words and the worlds to form in their imagination in a way that it's not quite the same when they're reading something from an ebook.
It's interesting. We recently published an e-version of our little book, I Love You Nutty, which Mia and I wrote together. And I think in a year we've sold about 2 because people want the paper version. There is no substitute for holding a beautiful paper book, colourful and bright and visually stimulating. But my kids' favourite books, well, Nutty's going through a Mr. Men, Little Miss phase at the moment.
Excellent.
And obviously Julia Donaldson in all her glory. And Nutty likes books that have children with Down syndrome in them. So there's a lovely book called I Can You? And she just says, oh, that's me, that's me, that's me. So that's interesting. She points at the pictures and identifies with those children. So we all need to see ourselves represented, don't we, really? And Mia has quite a wide taste, but what really got her into reading a couple of years ago was Liz Kessler, who is a local Cornish author and writes girls' adventures. They're not girly, they're quite gritty. There's always a little bit of a mystery, but they focus around mermaids, which sounds girly, but they're not. And so that was a real tipping point for her.
I do wonder if, because Hayley, my daughter's only just 2, so I do wonder sometimes if, certainly at Little Miss's age, obviously we become passionate and excited about certain books. I know my other half, for example, is a complete Hobbit fan. And for his brother's 10th birthday, he's significantly younger than us, Hayley. This isn't kind of 20 years ago. He brought him The Hobbit, and he wrote in the front of the book, you know, this was my favourite when I was your age, and I really look forward to chatting about it once you've had a read, and we can talk about the ideas you have about the book and things. Now, his brother loves it as well. And I wonder how much of it is that if you're excited about a certain story, do they kind of feed off that? Because in line with your kind of young girl adventurous books, we've just discovered Rosie Revere Engineer, which is written by an American author. It's probably a little bit old for Little Miss, but because she loves books, we get away with it because she just will sit and listen to a story for hours. But it's based around Rosie the Riveter, but she's now the great aunt. And it's all about little Rosie, who's modern day, and she loves engineering and she loves creating things. And it's all about the things that her and her great aunt build together. And it's kind of a nod historically, but it's just a really well-written story for girls, encouraging them to like maths and all the kind of stereotypical things they're not supposed to like. So obviously, I'm really excited by this book. And I'm just like, should we read Rosie? Should we read Rosie? Should we read Rosie? So Little Miss is like, Rosie book after every bedtime now. And I wonder how much of it is, if you're excited about a story, will they be?
Yeah.
When you read books that all of us and all the kids love, it almost doesn't matter. And as you say, the enthusiasm carries over. And even now, I mean, the boys will listen to a lot of the books Cara listens to because that whole kind of enthusiasm she has for them is infectious. So, they're not above listening to Angelina stories either.
Do they read to each other? And does Mia read to Natty, Hayley, as well?
Yes, Mia does read to Natty. On a Saturday evening, they'll probably sit in bed together and Mia will read to her. And Natty had a sleepover this weekend and they had every book off the shelves in the bedroom. They sat together reading to each other, which was really lovely to see. But I think it's not just the passion we exude when we read a book we love with our children. We are the ones that buy the books, aren't we? So I guess we're making choices. And we pick the books, don't we, that we want our children to be inspired by, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a degree of parental selection in some of the books that appear in the house. But something Heather often does, because she works 3 days a week, and often on one of the days when she isn't working, she'll take the kids down to the local library and let them pick their own books. So you get a nice mix of books that we've chosen for them and books that they've chosen for themselves as well.
It's a nice idea.
That's really nice.
because we can't get books fast enough for our daughter, she just gets not bored, but she just wants more and more. We started buying them in Oxfam, because the town we live in has an Oxfam bookshop, and it's amazing. We get them for like 99p, and they're in brilliant condition. Much cheaper way of doing it.
And that's the Meet the Parents Guide to Childhood Literacy. So reading is good, unless it's our kids reading about what we've written about them on our blogs, which perhaps isn't always so good. First, there was the original iPad. Then came the iPad Mini, the iPad Air, and the iPad Pro. Now Apple are pleased to announce the latest addition to their iPad range, the iPad Analog. Colloquially known as the Beats Our Old Kindle, or Book for short, the iPad Analog boasts a lightweight paper-based design and infinite battery life. It requires only external lighting and a willingness to turn pages by hand. No need to swipe left here. Software is available in both hardback and paperback form, and at an affordable price too. Get yours now. Not available from the Apple Store. As a mother, Hayley has experienced the ups and downs of having a child with Down syndrome with her daughter Natty. Indeed, I think it's probably fair to say she's one of the UK's most prominent Downs champions, talking about it frequently on radio, TV, and even at conferences. So we thought this would be a great chance to learn a bit more about a condition that affects approximately 1 in every 1,000 babies born in the UK. So, Hayley, why don't we start by talking about what Down syndrome actually is and the impact it can have on both the child and on their immediate family?
Well, Down syndrome is a completely random occurrence, and it's caused by the addition of an extra chromosome 21, which is why it's called trisomy 21 as well as Down syndrome. John Langdon Down first sort of identified the syndrome, and that's why we call it Down syndrome. There are certain medical conditions that can go with the conditions, such as perhaps hearing loss, perhaps heart conditions. About 50% of babies may have a heart condition, and perhaps some eyesight issues. But really, not every child will not have all of those things. And I think the key thing is that each child is a unique individual and more like their family and their parents and their siblings than any other child with Down syndrome, which is what I didn't realise when Natty was born. I thought she was a Downs baby, but of course she's not. She's Natty, and she has Down syndrome. It's just part of who she is. It's an important part of who she is, but it's not all that she is. So I think that's the key point. Yes, Down syndrome comes with a certain level of learning disability, which can vary. And of course, there's a nature-nurture effect that goes on as well, isn't there? So I spoke earlier about special reading techniques and early intervention. And of course, sort of years ago, when children with Down syndrome were institutionalised from birth and not given a chance to learn to read and write and live independently and get married, that didn't happen. So that's what sort of stuck, I think, in our sort of social psyche of what Down syndrome is. Of course, today it's very much different to that, Tim.
And like you said, every child who has Downs is a unique individual. And as we were saying earlier, your blog is all about personal stories of Natty and your life as a family. So from your own experience, how did you learn that she has Downs, and how did you react to the news?
Well, yes, as I say, Natty was born at home and very blue at birth. Clearly, something very wrong. She wasn't pinking up at all. But we had absolutely no idea. So I think the diagnosis was delivered around about 5 hours later, after the teams had saved her life, pretty much. And it was done in a way that was I can't politely describing it as just very medical and very negative, and there were tears from medical professionals and, sorries and so on and so forth. And if only I could go back and sort of, I wish I could do that day again, knowing what I know now and what was possible for Natty and how much she would enhance our lives and how incredibly unique and wonderful she is, as are all children with Down syndrome. I wouldn't have felt the way I felt that first day. So yeah, very emotional thinking about it even now. If you asked me too many more questions, I would probably burst into tears. Very emotional time thinking back, mostly because it was, I think, diagnosis. The language of medical professionals is something that I am really passionate about, and for me, language at point of diagnosis is crucial, and that's what I'm working to change really gently by working with the medical professionals. So it's not bad news. You're not sorry. It's not a risk. Natty wasn't a risk. She wasn't an abnormality, a chromosomal abnormality. She was just a little girl who needed a bit of extra support, really.
And like you said, Natty is, in many respects, a normal girl, just one who happens to have an extra chromosome. So, how have you handled that as a family ongoing? I mean, I remember you've written about some fantastic stories about her. I remember you read a post for my other podcast about a trip to the doctors that underlined just how much joy she can bring to other people.
Yes, and how she breaks down. But I mean, you say a normal little girl. What on earth is normal? None of us fit any particular mould, do we? And normal is one of those words that I use in inverted commas. Natty, I think, and any child, whatever their abilities and so-called disabilities, I think we're all, the human condition, we're all more alike than unalike, aren't we? We all love Christmas and chocolate and family and stories and books and so many things. We all laugh at farts, we all we all want to be happy and have friendships, and we love music and dance and food, and those are the things that bind us together. And I think what Natty has done for our family, certainly what she has taught me, certainly as a parent, is that you can't plan for everything. And actually the unexpected twists and turns in life are what turn out to be perhaps the best things in life that teach you the most. And I think that's how I would describe being a parent of a child with Down syndrome. What I feared as being the worst possible thing that could happen to us turned out to be the best.
Let's go back a little bit now to talking about the more clinical and medical side. So screening for Downs during pregnancy, how does that work currently? And can you talk us through the implications of some of the proposed changes that are being talked about for the screening process?
Yeah, I mean, screening is a huge can of worms to talk about here, Tim. But we've had screening for years. It's been around, certainly since the 60s, that there's been amniocentesis, but screening is getting more and more, in inverted commas, so-called, earlier, safer and less invasive. There's some quite interesting things going on with screening currently. We're about to roll out across England, sorry, not the UK, the non-invasive prenatal testing, this new test, which is actually, I'm avoiding the word better, it picks up Down syndrome more effectively, but it doesn't pick up other conditions such as Patau and Edwards syndrome as efficiently as amniocentesis. But we're being sold this new test. So the new test is coming out. It will be shortly taken over by a urine test, which will be even earlier and easier and cheaper. For me, it's not the test that there is an issue with, really, it's how it's implemented. So again, we come down to language. So if the tests are given to women as standard and sold as something you must do to screen out this scary sort of condition, then that becomes problematic for me. And ethically, we are sort of then targeting a particular genetic group in society, which is quite dangerous. So what I'm keen to work with medical professionals on doing is making sure that women and their partners know that the test is not compulsory, and being talked through what the implications of different results of the test are. So if the test shows up that your baby is likely to have Down syndrome, what that means for you before you have the test, because people find themselves in a very stressful situation while they wait for results, and then they're given a high risk, in inverted commas, bad word, of Down syndrome, and then all hell breaks loose. And then they're told they can be booked in for a termination within minutes of being given that diagnosis. So I think what we're sort of working towards asking for is a cooling off period, really good, updated, unbiased information about Down syndrome, not, as is the case, often 100-year-old medical sort of information and so on and so forth, and often very, very personal, subjective advice from medical professionals, such as, I wouldn't have a baby with Downs if I were you, and I can't continue to treat you if you carry on with this pregnancy, and so on and so forth. So you can see that things are not unbiased at the moment. So yeah, that's where we're at with the screening at the moment, Tim. It's a big issue.
Yeah, and as you say, I mean, the key to it all is proper communication, careful use of language, and giving parents or prospective parents the education that allows them to make an informed decision in a timely way, and not jump to a knee-jerk emotional reaction, because and different parents will respond in different ways to the same situation, and it's important to allow for that whole range of possible reactions, isn't it?
Exactly. And as you know, Tim, I've said this many times publicly and in my blog, but it's about, as you say, updated information and time to make a proper informed choice. And I think currently what is sold as choice is often people being almost railroaded into early euthanasia. And Down syndrome is sold as a condition that causes much suffering, which, as we know, it doesn't. So, yes, it's about allowing people to really make decisions that are right for them and their family. But the choice to continue must be allowed as well. And many families who do choose to continue a pregnancy are often reporting that they are continually asked if they would like a termination. And of course, if a baby has, in inverted commas, a severe handicap, which is a horrible phrase from a 1968 law, it's legal to terminate up to birth, so up to 40 weeks. So again, that's something that I think we need to look at changing, really.
Finally, you've done much more around education and to champion the cause than just on your blog. So, this year alone, you've spoken at it was a nurses' conference, wasn't it? And
yes, it was student midwives and nurses. We do quite a bit of that, and sort of teachers and stuff as well. But very often, I wish I had a sort of teleporter, Tim, because living in Cornwall, it's very difficult to get to these, places. But yes, we've done quite a lot of media stuff and talks this year. But for me, I have huge respect for the NHS and a huge respect for our midwives and learning disability nurses. So we need to work together, and we can't sort of chastise them for perhaps the wrong word that they might use here and there. It's just about working together to get it a bit better. So yes, we've been working on as well a BBC documentary, which is coming out, fingers crossed, next month.
This is the one with Sally Phillips, isn't it?
With Sally Phillips of Miranda and Bridget Jones fame. But of course, to me, Sally now is not that slightly sweary comic actress. She's just a mum with a bee in her bonnet who has a son with Down syndrome. So Ollie is 11 and he's fantastic, and my Nattie's a little bit in love with him. There's a secret for you. And it was her idea, so the documentary is her brainchild, and she's fronting it, and she's been all over the world interviewing key champions of the cause, really. And also those who have developed the test, and medical professionals and ethicists, and hopefully it will be a very thought-provoking documentary that will spark important conversations about this topic, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's something to watch out for on our screens in the coming weeks, hopefully. Hayley, thanks very much for taking the time to talk us through what Down syndrome really means, and for all the work that you've already done and continue to do to raise awareness and educate people around all the issues. So you can find out more about Down syndrome on Hayley's blog at downsideup.com and on the website of the Down Syndrome Association at downs-syndrome.org.uk, and I will attach links in the show notes over on our website. And that's it for this episode of the Meet the Parents podcast, other than to add in 2 bits of news that occurred after the rest of this podcast was recorded. Firstly, the shortlist for this year's Brit Mums Brilliance in Blogging Awards have been announced, and no fewer than 5 members of the podcast crew have been nominated. So Hayley's in the final 10 of the Inspire category, Dave is up for the Family Blog Award, Vicky is shortlisted in Video, and John and I are up against each other for the Reader's Choice Award. Public voting for all 12 awards is now open until May the 18th, so cast your vote via the link at britmums.com/awards while you can. And finally, this week's big winner is our Hannah, who gave birth to a baby girl, Martha, on Sunday morning. So congratulations from all of us to Hannah, Phil, Toby and Martha. We'll be back again next week, but in the meantime, here's where you can find us all online. Amie?
Findingourfeet.co.uk, and I'm on Twitter and Instagram at findingourfeet.
And Hayley?
And I'm at downsideup.com. There are 2 S's in there. And on Twitter at downsideup as well.
And as ever, I'm at slouchingtowardsthatcham.com and on Twitter at ThatchamDad. So you can download this podcast on iTunes and on Android devices, on our website at meettheparentspodcast.com and via a variety of podcasting apps. And do please give us a follow on Twitter at ParentsPodcast and Facebook at facebook.com/meettheparentspodcast. So thank you for listening, and do please join us again next week. Good night.
Ta-ra!
Bye!